Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on the 2025 Climate Impacts Awards. We'll just wait a couple minutes as the participants join before getting started. For anyone just joining, we're just going to give it another minute or so, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we can start. So welcome everyone. This webinar is designed to help potential applicants understand more about the 2025 Climate Impacts Awards, which is about unlocking urgent climate action by making the health effects of climate change visible. Next slide, please. Great. So just a quick note of housekeeping. So we will be shutting off the chat for this webinar, but thanks to everyone who has said hello. Hi back. So we will be recording this meeting and we'll share that recording afterwards. It will be available on the scheme page. And just in general, please keep regularly checking the scheme page because that's where we include all of our updates. And it's helpful as well when you go on the scheme page to accept the cookies because that really helps us understand our reach and then we can try to improve for future calls if necessary. So as I said, we won't be using the chat function for this webinar. And that's just to be able to monitor it because there's so many of you on the call. But we will be having a Q&A session at the end of our presentation. And we'll be using slido.com for that. So you can just go on slido.com and then you use hashtag Climate Impacts Awards and you can submit any question. We likely won't be able to get to all of your questions in today's session, but we will do our best to answer those. And we will continue to answer questions offline after this session ends. And as you can see, you're able to upvote certain questions. So that just really helps us go through them to see which ones more people want answers to. So please use that function. And we'll keep the Slido open after this call and we'll continue to answer questions. But if you do have further questions after that, we will provide information on who to email. Next slide, please. So who do we have on the call today? So my name is Georgia. I'm a research manager in the climate and health team. We also have Madeline Thompson, who is the head of impacts and adaptation in the climate and health team. And she will be chairing our panel discussion. And then we also have Ben Harrison, who's from our research funding team. He'll be going through a few logistics in a bit. Next slide, please. So first, we are going to go through the climate and health strategy at Wellcome. And then I'm going to give an overview of the 2025 Climate Impacts Awards. Then we will have a panel discussion, and then we will end with a Q&A discussion, as I said. So next slide. Great. So obviously, some people on this call will know a lot about Welcome, some will know a little less, some will know a lot about the Climate Impacts Awards, and some will know a little less. So I'm just going to go over broadly what we do at Welcome. We, as an organization, we enable and invest in research. We also influence change in policy and practice. And we also engage and work with people. And we do all of this through the research that we fund. And we have kind of two programs. We've got Discovery and Solutions, and the Climate and Health team sits within this solution space. So what we do is generate evidence for much needed action and impact in the short term. And we focus on urgent health challenges where Welcome's experience, expertise, and influence can drive rapid change. And those three health challenges are mental health, climate and health, and infectious diseases. So as you can see in the next slide, those are those three strategic areas, and climate and health is where the Climate Impacts Awards sit. So next slide. So what is our climate and health strategy? So we have both a vision and a mission. And our vision is a world where catastrophic climate breakdown is averted in a way that allows human health to flourish. And our mission really is putting health at the heart of climate and health, climate change action. And so we've got three strategic goals that encompass all of the work that we do in climate and health. So the first is a transdisciplinary climate and health ecosystem, which enables an urgent global response to the health impacts of climate change. The second is a robust, action-oriented climate and health global evidence base, which defines context-specific climate action. And the third is climate and health evidence, which drives action by decision makers. And we do this through three streams of work. So we have the impacts and adaptation team, which is where the Climate Impacts Awards sit. We also have a mitigation team, and then we have a capacity and field development team that do that broader ecosystem work. Great. So now we get to the 2025 Climate Impacts Awards. So we've been running this scheme. This is now the third year that we've run this scheme. And we've really kept the overall aim of the scheme the same each year. And that is to make the impacts of climate change on physical and mental health visible to drive urgent climate policy action at scale. And we do this by supporting transdisciplinary teams to deliver short-term, high-impact projects that maximize policy outcomes by combining evidence generation with influencing and engagement strategies. And each year, we have tried to prioritize funding for research that involves and serves the needs of communities most impacted by the health effects of climate change, and that is anywhere in the world. Next slide, please. So this is a truly global call, and you can see through this map where we have funded projects in both year one and year two. And one note I'll give, as the years progress is you can see on the side there the projects that we've funded through year one and year two of this scheme. And I would really look to that to understand like the themes that we've funded and the areas that we've funded in, because we're really not looking to fund the exact same projects each year. We're trying to expand the Climate Impacts Awards landscape. So I would really recommend looking at these projects and seeing what we've already funded. Next slide. So this is just a snapshot of what the key aspects of the call. So location, it can be anywhere in the world except for mainland China, which we articulate on the scheme page. Funding, teams can ask for up to 2.5 million, and duration, the project can last up to 3 years. And in terms of a lead applicant, we are looking for mid-career or established researchers, although you can have early career researchers as part of the team. And there are really 3 key elements of the Climate Impacts Awards, and these mimic the 3 core aspects of Welcome's broader work. So the first is research. So the evidence generation is key. We are looking for teams to identify an evidence gap that can be filled within a short time frame by generating and/or synthesizing data and insights on the context-specific environmentally mediated health effects of climate change. And I'll get into that a bit later. The next is this influence change. So policy opportunity. We are looking for a clear theory of change and a strong understanding of policy levers. So we want teams to pair this evidence generation with a policy outcome that can be achievable within the award period and should support meaningful and sustainable change. So teams should be able to clearly articulate the context behind this policy opportunity, the pull factors in the policy opportunity targeted, and the implications of the set of activities. And the final part is engaging people. So we follow an engaged research approach. So we are looking for teams to meaningfully engage relevant stakeholders and communities from the outset. So we are looking for key stakeholders to be embedded within the design of the project. And this should be reflected in the composition of the team, but also in the design of the research proposal and the communication strategy. Great. So just a few tips for writing your proposal. So as I said, we're looking for a clear problem statement with a theory of change. We're also looking for transdisciplinary teams, so not just an academic team. We're really looking for researchers that are working with engagement specialists, communication specialists, policy experts, key stakeholders, and we're looking for some part of the team to have a history of working together so that you're leveraging prior relationships and projects. And make sure that you detail in the proposal your methodology. So how you will generate or synthesize that evidence, be very clear with that. Why the expected policy change your work will influence is realistic given the short time frame, and how you will meaningfully engage communities and key stakeholders. So what is your engaged research approach? Next slide. Great. And these are just a few lessons learned from the past few years that we've been doing this. You know, we have a committee of which we've got the chair of the committee here on the panel. And there's a real wide range of experience in that committee reviewing the shortlisted proposals. And I will say that it's a really tough review process. You know, this is a very competitive call. So if there's any lessons learned, it's to really make sure that you're responding to the core needs of this call. You know, the stronger proposals that we've seen, they're very clear in their problem articulation and their theory of change, and they're so clear about this policy opportunity. So you have to be clear the extent to which the policy change can be achieved, and to also articulate what the longer term implications of that are. Now I'll just get into what is in scope for this award and what is out of scope. So we are looking for proposals where the primary focus is on the current or future direct and environmentally mediated physical or mental health outcomes attributable to climate. So that can be physical or mental health. It doesn't have to be both of those. And we also need proposals to include those three key elements that I identified, which is the evidence gap, the policy pathway, and the engaged research approach. So we're really looking for proposals that have that well-rounded incorporation of those three key elements. So what is out of scope? So in terms of resubmissions, you can only resubmit a project if you've been shortlisted in either year 1 or year 2 of the Climate Impacts Awards. But you can only resubmit a proposal once, so that's with the same project. So as you can see here, proposals must be submitted in the first or second round of the scheme. Proposals that were shortlisted in the first or second round that have not undergone significant revision. So you must be able to demonstrate how the shortlisted proposal that you're resubmitting has undergone revision based on the feedback provided, and then you can't resubmit more than once. Another thing that is out of scope is proposals where the goal of the project is general advocacy. We are looking for something more targeted than that. And then out of scope, the proposals where there aren't those three key elements or that they aren't articulated. And this is more focused on the theme. So out of scope are proposals where the primary focus is on socially mediated health effects. So that's such as migration and livelihoods. We are aware that all health outcomes have a social context, but we are looking for research where environmentally driven aspects of climate change are the primary drivers of a given health outcome. So you can include socially mediated health effects, but they have to be a secondary focus of the research. They cannot be the primary focus. The next out of scope topic is current or future health effects attributable to the consequences of climate change action, mitigation, or adaptation. So an example of this is not a co-benefits course. So we are not looking for proposals that show the health co-benefits of a particular mitigation or adaptation policy, although you can be targeting an adaptation or mitigation policy in your policy opportunity. And finally, current or future health effects attributable to the drivers of climate change, for example, fossil fuel emissions. So this does include fossil fuel related air pollution. And again, it cannot be the primary focus of the research, but it can be a secondary factor. And I think that is all from me, and I will now pass over to Ben Harrison from our research funding team, who will go through more logistics on the application process.
Thank you, Georgia. Hi, everyone. I'm Ben, one of the funding managers here at Wellcome, and I'm going to briefly take you through some of the details of the application process and what you need to know. So here we've got some key points, eligibility at a glance. Please do read the full scheme page for all of the eligibility criteria. But to highlight, you and your team must be transdisciplinary, demonstrate strong expertise in health and climate, have experience designing and planning research projects with major policy implications, and you must be a team of 2 to 8 lead and co-applicants together. Your organization should be a higher education institution, a research institute, a non-academic healthcare organization, or a not-for-profit or non-governmental organization. And as Georgia previously mentioned, your administering organization can be based anywhere in the world, apart from mainland China, and it must be an organization that can sign up to Wellcome's standard grant conditions. Commercial organizations, to note, are not eligible to apply as administering organizations for this call. However, co-applicants and collaborators can be based at commercial organizations. And when research occurs in more than one location, applications must include either a lead or co-applicant in each country where the research is taking place. And then briefly, I'll run through the full application assessment criteria. As before, please do read the scheme page in full. There's much more detail on there around these assessment criteria. But we will be reviewing, or committee will be reviewing applications against 4 weighted criteria: the policy opportunity, the researcher methods, the engaged research approach, and the team skills and experience, each equally weighted at 25%. The application form now reflects these sections, and you must submit 1,000 words to address each area of the policy opportunity, researcher methods, and engaged research approach, rather than load a PDF. Next slide, please, Georgia. Thank you. And submitting your application, before you apply, please make sure you read everything on the scheme page. There's lots of detail on there. Please take your time to go through it and review all of the information. You will need to complete your application on the Wellcome Funding platform. The submission deadline is 5 p.m. GMT on the 30th of April 2025. You do not need to contact us before you write and submit your application. But if you do have any questions about eligibility, what we offer, or about completing the application form itself, please contact our funding information advisors either through the website or by emailing fundingsupport@wellcome.org. We do not answer questions on scope or competitiveness of proposals. But if you do have questions, please contact climateimpacts@wellcome.org. You will need to submit to your administering organisation as well prior to the deadline to allow them to submit the application in time. If your organisation is new to Wellcome or has never submitted a full application before, please get in touch with the funding information team to get this set up. And here is the timeline for a brief overview. So this round of the Climate Impacts Awards was launched on the 6th of February 2025. As previously mentioned, the full application deadline is the 30th of April 2025. Shortlisting of the applications we receive will be taking place in June. And then the committee will review those applications that are shortlisted in early July 2025. And then funding decisions will be released in August. I believe we already had a question about start dates, so we would expect start dates to be following the funding decision once award letter is issued following that August date. That's all the details from me. Please do read the scheme page in full. Contact us if you have any questions. I will now pass back to Georgia and the panel for their discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Ben. So Madeline, I'll hand over to you to introduce our panel today.
Well, first of all, thank you all for joining us. We have a very high call number, and we really understand the interest and excitement that has been generated by this call. It's a different type of call to much of Wellcome's funding calls, and so I'm delighted to have my panelists here today. If you can put your screens on. Wilmot James, Garth Davis, and Gautam Barn. And the reason that we have a panel is Georgia and Ben have really explained some of the nuts and bolts of the call. We want to give you a flavour of the call and what we're trying to do with this call, which is quite different in many ways from the many of the other calls that we put out at Wellcome. And so first of all, I would like to introduce you to Wilmot James, who chairs our funding committee. And you will realise, because this is the third year of the funding call, it's not a traditional call, it is a scheme, i.e. we're able to bring back many members of the committee to review proposals, but also add new ones as we go along. We're able to learn from our previous calls what we thought was successful, what we think we should change, and we build that in as well. And so today in the panel, I just want Wilmot James from Brown University, School of Public Health, to join us. Garth Davis, who's very excited to bring into this panel, who's just joined us at Wellcome as our head of communications, and Gautam Barn, who we're delighted to have as the PI of one of our Climate Impact Awards, and just to share their experiences. And what I want to do, and we have, okay, so it's 25 past. What I want to do first of all is to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and to explain a little bit to you about their role and experience in the area of climate and health, how they interact currently in the climate and health work that they do, and how they have become engaged in the Climate Impact Awards. And then we'll go into some more detailed questions that are very targeted around the call itself. So I'd like to invite, first of all, Wilmot, to just give us a bit of an introduction to yourself before we go into more detailed questions. Over to you, Wilmot.
So with many thanks to you, Madeline, and to the Wellcome team, and welcome to everybody globally. And thank you very much for the interest in the scheme. So my name is Wilmot James. I'm a professor in the School of Public Health and a senior advisor to the Pandemic Center at Brown University, which is in Providence, Rhode Island. So to say, I'm social science trained. And my first major research project that I undertook while I was at the University of Cape Town had to do with labor migration, which ended up in a book that was published called Our Precious Metal. This was about labor migration to the South African mines. And on the basis of that, I was appointed by Nelson Mandela to lead South Africa's task team on international migration, which resulted in 2 pieces of legislation, a Refugee Protection Act and an Immigration Reform Act. I've spent some time in many commissions of government in South Africa. In 2009, I entered Parliament, became the health spokesperson, also trade and industry and science and technology. And during that time, became involved in pandemic response as a result of the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. All by way of background to say that I've been immersed in the area of policy formulation for quite a long time, and then came into the area of global health security, pandemic response, epidemic response, and of course its interaction with climate variables, which of course is key. And so when we speak about policy levers, I've been immersed in that area. And we are talking here about research that in the area of climate and health that must result in policy formulation and execution in order to have an impact. So to say that I'm a co-PI at Brown University in a project dealing with early warning and early detection systems when it comes to epidemic outbreaks, dealing with infectious disease, and therefore immersed in the area of understanding which climate aspects matter when it comes to being able to both anticipate, predict to the extent that that's possible, climate impacts. So with that to say that I'm really honored to chair the committee for the Climate Health Impact Committee for the Wellcome Trust.
Thank you so much, Wilmot, for introducing yourself and giving a flavour, if you like, of the committee members that we've been able to attract to this call. The breadth of experience in the committee, I think, is quite extraordinary, including, of course, your own. And we're very grateful that you're able to chair the committee for us. I'd like now to pass to Garth. Garth, you've just joined us. Welcome, and we're just getting to know you. But our early conversations tell us that you have a lot to share with us and to help us with when we think about bringing communications into these proposals. And so if you could just introduce yourself a little bit, tell us, give us a bit of your background, and then we'll move on with the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So yeah, so I'm Garth Davis. I'm the new head of communications of climate and health. Welcome. This is week 4, so kind of very new into the team. But yeah, so I'm responsible, leading our work on communications and engagement to support the Climate and Health Solutions Programme, to make sure that we're putting kind of health at the climate action, and that we're communicating, the science and the research in a way that leads to action by decision makers. So my background, prior to Wellcome, was that I was head of press and public affairs at the University of Exeter, so working at the university, kind of where I spent most of my time communicating our research on climate, environment, and health. And Exeter has a very kind of large, strong team working on climate health research, huge number of international partners and international kind of programs. A partnership with the UK Met Office, for example, and I led our international communications work on things like the annual global carbon budget, huge amount of work on climate tipping points, and a lot of work on climate solutions. Exeter, for example, is the home to the European Centre for Environment and Human Health, and does a lot of amazing work on things like kind of microplastics, AMR, nature-based solutions, etc. So a lot of experience kind of working, on climate and health research, but also how that influences kind of policy and kind of on government decision making, which I'll come on to a little bit later. Prior to that, I have been a chief press officer in the Prime Minister's office in the UK on health. So kind of nearly 4 years working on health in the Prime Minister's office, joining at the very end of Tony Blair, Gordon Brown and David Cameron. I've worked in the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office in senior communications roles, the Cabinet Office, Department of Health. I led kind of national public health campaigns on things like teenage pregnancy, sexual health and smoking. And I've been a director of communications for the National Health Service in a region in the UK. So in a way, this sort of brings together a lot of my, kind of expertise and knowledge. I've spent, most of my career either in health or working on climate communications. So yeah, this just sort of feels like, kind of perfect kind of role and opportunity, and really, delighted to be working with the team and supporting this work.
Thank you so much, Garth. That is, and yeah, it's just so wonderful to have you on the team. I'm just going to move now to Gautam, and it's great to have a representative, if you like, of our 22 climate impact awardees on this call. And if you could just give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself and your engagement in this space, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Madeline. So folks, I'm Gautam Bhan. I'm Associate Dean of the School of Human Development at the Indian Institute for Human Settlements based in Bangalore. I'm an urban sociologist and a planner by training, so very much a non-epidemiological approach into questions of health. A lot of our work at IHS has actually, in the realm of health, has been on two core areas. One is to think a little bit about the health of informal workers, and particularly how climate change is changing impacts of productivity and health for them. And the second has been to look at non-communicable disease in low-income urban communities. A lot of the focus on health systems in the Global South tends to be from paradigms of infectious disease control. But a lot of the burdens of mortality and mobility are now on the non-communicable disease side, but our primary health systems were not designed for them. And on the second side, IHS has a very large footprint in thinking about climate, environment, and sustainability. So for us, the project that I work on actually brings these two things together really wonderfully. So our project looks at the effects of climate change on health in vulnerable urban settlements. And that spatialization is a very, very key focus for us, because we actually, Madeline talked about thinking about context. And for us, the particular spatial context of vulnerable urban settlements is a pivotal way to see the climate health connection, whether it's waste workers, work areas and settlement housing, whether it's low-income informal slum communities by the fishing villages, by the water, whether it is, so it's this peculiar intersection between spatial vulnerability, occupational vulnerability, and then how climate and health enter into that space. And the other thing that's been really wonderful about this project for us and the call is that we're doing it across the Global South. So the project is India, South Africa, Sierra Leone, and Kenya. And across those four, there is also a real opportunity to take seriously that when you locate questions of climate health in particular cities, particularly cities of the Global South, then the context actually changes some of the way you think about the questions and the nature of evidence itself. So it's been an opportunity to bring together these two strands for us.
So I'm just going to ask some relatively quick questions to each of you. I'm going to start with Wilmot. And this is just really to help our audience think through some of the ways they might approach writing their proposals. And so for Wilmot, perhaps there are many ways, of course, to approach policy change. And some approaches can take a very long time, certainly longer than the timeframes of these awards. So what advice could you give to potential applicants on achieving high impact in the short term?
So thanks for that question, Madeline. So let me just say, and some of this may be obvious, but to start off with, the project has to be framed in a compelling way, which means it has to be new, it has to be original, but based on established history of research in the area. So it requires clear definition. Secondly, it requires practicality, which means that one has to define the research in a way that answers the fundamental question, but also becomes a basis for framing interventions. These are policy interventions. Third, your partners have to be complementary to whatever skills you have to offer. And in particular, when it comes to this project, where we're interested in short, medium, and long-term impact, is to have strong implementing partners. And of course, just to know that there has to be early buy-in. It will require just finally a keen understanding of how government actually works. So policy is not simply a matter of writing a white paper, although that's the start. It has to go into a mode where one is able to identify who the champions are in your particular local national government. You need to understand clearly how legislation is framed, how budgets are passed, and what the passageway is through that political world. And so a keen understanding of that. I can elaborate more on those particular questions, but I would say that an approach to this, which is by no means a traditional academic project, right? It is geared towards interventions that matter in an area of change that is compelling. I mean, the world faces three major dangers, right? There's epidemics and pandemics, climate-related issues, and extreme weather events associated with that. And it's now rearing its head again, which is nuclear. But we leave that aside for a minute. So we're dealing with a massive, massive global challenge. Requires not only local state interventions, but a cooperation between governments so that there is a globalized and a regionalized response.
Thank you very much, Wilmot. And now if I could pass to Gautam and just say the core of the call is climate and health evidence synthesis or evidence generation. You've now been running your project for over a year. Can you speak about your experience in delivering on the evidence component in this short time frame?
Yeah, no, I think, for us, it's been really interesting because one of the questions around the other end of policy in the last cycle is the way the policy is received by people in communities. And that's really our location. And the hypothesis we had is that if the language in which people connect climate and health does not find home in the policy, then when it arrives, it will arrive as state action, but not have any roots in the everyday life of people. And I think that in one way, therefore, our notion of evidence is to use new ethnographic methods of health histories, of saying what are the ways in which people perceive climate change is changing and impacting their health, and to move beyond a biomedical or physiological notion of health for this. For example, in some of the evidence coming to us, we realize that people articulate their vulnerability to climate either through effects on their own bodies, the effects on their children's health, the effects on their work, and their effects on their housing. Now, their way of speaking intertwines these multiple vulnerabilities, right? So there isn't a way to isolate health away from those other ones. This is the social determinants approach, which theoretically we're sort of seeing in our evidence, right? But what do you do with that evidence then? So for us, for example, the policy, take what Wilmot was saying, the policy implications is not just for climate policy or for a city climate action plan, but it is in designing climate resilient social protection for waste workers. It is in designing addressing vulnerability in terms of health, both in terms of its economic impact, in terms of where it's coming. The second is to really thicken the language beyond the technical and the academic and the discursive of the IPCCs and the larger ministry language, which is to say, what is the way in which people talk about climate change? Because if they don't perceive it impacting their health, eventually the policies will not hold root. So for us, really, the question of evidence is a step away from the econometric and the climate measures and the models. Our evidence is the language in which people take concepts and bring it into their life, and to reflect the language of their life worlds into policy they will own and not just be beneficiaries or of. And it's been really wonderful in this grant, particularly for us, to think of, therefore, to use notions of health histories and storytelling. We are working with 2 documentary filmmakers who are going to make work. And as an academic, it's really interesting because we are ethnographically bound within certain academic methods. But the documentary filmmaker runs sort of transversely to us and tells the story on her own terms, and really to sort of make this notion of health common sense in thinking about not just climate, but also vulnerable housing and about social protection. So for us, it's that slightly expanded space. Health insurance is expanding in India on a very large scale. What can our evidence offer notions of public health insurance programs that are being designed for the first time for many Indian residents? This is the kind of policy questions we're wanting to ask and offer a different kind of evidence to this discussion.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I think that's one flavor of one particular grant, and there are, like I say, another 21. So I would encourage people to go and look online and have a, you know, what people have proposed in the past. But I think you articulated the approach, if you like, that we want to take this with this call is like really getting into the needs and perceptions of the communities that your research is supposed to serve. And you're obviously being widely appreciated by our audience, because I can see lots of hearts and cheers coming up the slide. So now, Garth, you're a new member of Wellcome. You haven't been engaged with the Climate Impact Awards, but can you still share your experience on how to create powerful narratives that connect research to policy? Something which is, of course, highly relevant to this call.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I think my common message really, and picking up some of what the previous panelists have said, is really just a, you know, good communications engagement, you know, really focuses on the audience, you know, kind of really a deep understanding of the audience that you're communicating, engaging with, you know, kind of so, you know, their perspective, their current knowledge, kind of the politics, kind of culture, you know, kind of, and, you know, kind of what might, you know, kind of sort of shift and change from kind of one point to another, and what's worked and what hasn't worked before. And so, you know, kind of policymakers is a really broad, you know, kind of term and audience. So, you know, what I'd say is, you know, to really think and focus and understand as much as you can, you know, exactly, you know, which policymakers you want to reach and why, you know, kind of for what outcome, and really understand that audience. And, you know, kind of, and obviously kind of say, you know, narratives and storytelling and the presentation of information really can make a really significant difference, a really big impact. It is the way that I think you can kind of get change and influence decision makers. You know, kind of, I've seen that, you know, happen time and time again. I mean, I think I thought I'd just kind of talk about just one very high level example kind of work that, you know, kind of that I worked on at Exeter. So I talked earlier that, you know, kind of I worked a lot on climate tipping points, kind of initially, kind of a lot on kind of Earth system tipping points, negative tipping points in the climate. Things like, you know, Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets, kind of Amazon forest dieback, coral reef die-offs, etc. But actually, over the last kind of couple of years, working with a guy called Professor Tim Lenton and a kind of an international team, we flipped that narrative to talk about positive tipping points. And this is about, you know, kind of how narrative can shift, you know, kind of, and kind of connect to kind of policy. And we did a lot of work kind of basically kind of where we looked at what were the solutions, you know, kind of what were the positive tipping points, what were the actions that you could take that would actually change the system. And so I kind of brought together a huge number of partners and collaborators to look at kind of like, you know, what those positive tipping points might be. And we kind of started off by launching a report kind of called the Breakthrough Effect, which is about triggering a cascade of tipping points to accelerate net zero. And we kind of came up with kind of sort of, you know, specific kind of policies or kind of or mandates around things like electric vehicles, renewable energy, kind of green ammonia in agriculture, kind of alternative proteins. And what we found, you know, kind of in the knock-on impacts of that, and what we found was that, you know, we took that initially to the World Economic Forum and a business and policy-making audience, and they really loved it. You know, kind of they really loved it. It kind of got a huge amount of kind of interest and kind of in coverage, media coverage. But I think it was because it was very solutions focused. It was really kind of, you know, kind of, it was kind of coming with, you know, kind of solutions and positive ways through that I think kind of policymakers are looking for, not just the problems, but the solutions. And we then went on to kind of to build on that work, got funding, more partners, and we launched kind of major reports at climate conferences. kind of opened New York Climate Week quite recently, on particular kind of policies that were most effective in things like kind of power, kind of heating and transport, and really made very specific recommendations, but looked at the economic costs as well, like kind of really understood, you know, where policymakers and the business and finance audience may be coming from in terms of, you know, kind of investing and making policy. So I just mentioned that it's a really broad, you know, kind of example. But I think, you know, kind of thinking however much that you can kind of come with the solutions, but you've really thought through and you can offer kind of policymakers what the different options are and why one, you know, kind of solution is better than another. And it really understands the context in which you're delivering that kind of policy or change. So yeah, kind of, I think I was just going to give that, you know, kind of broad example, and yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. And so just a second round of questions, and the first one goes to Wilmot again. So we are anticipating a very competitive call this year. They've been very competitive previously, but we are, you know, thinking that things will actually escalate this year, given challenges in the climate and health funding landscape that has emerged as a result of the US elections and the new Trump administration's impact on USAID, NIH, etc. So given the level of competitiveness that we expect, with your experience as chair of the committee, how should potential applicants ensure that they're responding to the core needs of the scheme? And I say this, in, you know, because we are a little concerned that people will say, "Oh, I had this great proposal that was focused on NIH. I'll just submit it into this awards." How do you think people should think before they submit in terms of making their proposals competitive within the climate impact awards?
So as you know, the key focus of the scheme has to do with three variables. First is that good proposals must show a compelling framing of the research, because what the scheme wants to do is invest in the research, and that research must spot a gap that can show impact in the short term and medium term. So that's the first thing. The second is this hypothesis around influencing change, which is dependent on having a fairly sophisticated understanding of what it means to frame a proposal that in fact would be targeted at interventions that make a difference and therefore is measurable in terms of the outcome when it comes to change. So, and how one does that, the influence part, in the end will result, to be successful, must result in public sector transformations, right? So we're talking about largely about government policy, but government policy that interacts with the private sector and interacts, as been noted, with communities, because in the end, if it doesn't land, if a policy change does not land solidly within the community, it will generate resistance, misunderstanding, and so on. So key here is to really, I really want to emphasize this, is successful applications to the scheme must be based on a keen understanding of how governments work. And those governments are different. And there are national governments, there are federal governments, there are governments that, in terms of their design, result in the development of different kinds of policy mechanisms. So, but firstly, a keen understanding of government, a really informed understanding of who the champions are for change when it comes to the climate health area in your local setting. International expertise is great, but that's required. And then an understanding of what the levers are. And a lot of, obviously politicians have a fairly short-term horizon when it comes to dealing with these things. And what's required is for the constituencies to be activated to keep their seats warm, so that they in fact do act and not take a long time. And so you need to understand, in terms of understanding the levers of change, what constituencies are interested in, what affects them on a very local level. So, and then finally, it's about engaging people, right? So it's meaningful engagement with stakeholders and communities from the very outset. This point has been made, and can't emphasize that enough. So it's those three things: investing in the research, influencing change, and engaging people. And that's quite unique in terms of the scheme, in terms of what's required, and those things intersect. So with that, back to you, Madeline.
Okay, thank you. And it makes me want to remind people, I mean, one of the criteria we had about the structure of the team and the PI was that the PI would be more likely mid-career as a senior PI. And the reason for that is it takes a lot of experience, usually, to be able to bring together all these different components with the depth of knowledge and understanding of the local context that is needed to be able to deliver one of these awards. And on top of that, the delivery of a project in a short time frame, I mean, it might, for many funders, 3 years is actually a standard time frame, but for us, it's a short time frame. And the reason for that is delivery now, act now on climate change, because we know of its urgency. But at the same time, you need to have a reasonably well-developed team in order to be able to deliver in that time frame. If people are trying to put together brand new teams with all of these different elements, it would be hard to deliver the quality of project that we're expecting. But we know, a team might be very strong in the community engagement aspect, in the research synthesis, etc., but not have focused so much on the policy opportunity. If they can bring in a policy partner that works for them, then that would be able to go forward. So the idea is, leverage your team experience and fill it out with this project, as opposed to start from new. So that's, thank you very much for that, Wilmot. And I'm just going to move to Gautam now. There are many ways that this call differs from other research funding schemes with a focus on policy change, transdisciplinary teams, and engaged research. Can you discuss what your team has been able to achieve through this award that is different to more traditional research funding programs?
Yeah, no, I'll say two things briefly. I mean, one is just, Madeline, to underscore the point that you just said. I mean, I think our structure works really well because this is a set of people who've known each other for some time. We have worked together for some time. Folks in the African Centre for Cities in Cape Town, folks in the Carnegie Design Institute in Nairobi, in SLURC, and the International Institute of Environment and Development in London. And so part of it is that because we know each other well, we are within each other, we know what each other can do well. And so I think what this grant has allowed us to do is, one is to focus on the aggregate of our knowledge across our sites. And I think that's a really unique opportunity that a lot of grants don't give you, because it takes a lot of time and research to be able to understand each other's context long enough then to be able to say something across them. So we feel like we entered mid-conversation in being able to speak across. The second thing is that one criteria we had in shaping our consortium is that the communities we're working in are communities we have been working in for a very long time. And that goes to your 3-year grant time frame. We can only do this in the time frame because we are not entering new communities and building trust and relationships. We have been in these communities for a decade. We know these communities, we know these people, we have walked in and added a layer of complexity. And I think that's so important because one is trying to find an impossible delta, which is communities have things to say about health. They have perceptions about climate. You're trying to connect the two in a way that isn't about causal connection that is empirical, but a lived connection affectively, emotionally, materially, and then to see how it's changed over time. So it's very challenging to put your finger. This is why climate and health is so hard to hold together, right? Because there's so much noise that it's hard to isolate that, which is especially in poor working communities who have 99 health problems even without climate change. So they're happy to tell you about them. So the transdisciplinarity has been really important for us to be able to have the time to focus in on the delta, to really think about that line between climate and health, and take out the noise on the other health vulnerabilities and the larger scales. The second thing I'll say that is, I think important for people applying to this call is there are very few global funding calls that allow a PI based outside the global north. And that is just the truth of it. I've been in this game for a very long time, and I have never been PI on an international grant while being based in India. And I think this is a profoundly important point, because I think it allows transdisciplinarity and networks and connections that are not only rooted in place, but are led from place. And it really allows us to say that there is knowledge we have to offer that honestly, climate and health may connect in ways in India that it does not connect in Germany. And I think that's the question of place really matters. And our policymakers are already, we have an opposite challenge, Wilmot, which is that our policymakers are deeply enamored of models that come from the West and come from the North. And half our job is to get them to unlearn some of these certainties and say, build our models from here. We're not going to be able to deliver things that have been designed for radically different contexts. And so the ability to really use this call to generate knowledge that where the policy loop is closed locally, but is not so local because it's 4 countries across the South. So there's a lovely scale, a move between scale that has been amazing to us. And finally, on a personal note for us, India can feel so vast. And so, within our India project, we have 6 sites in different parts of the country. And they're like 6 different universes. Like, they may as well be different countries at this point. But for us to be able to look at India through the lens of the Kenyan experience and the South African experience and the Sierra Leonean experience, it's been an invaluable intellectual exercise. And I think there are echoes and recognitions and similarities and differences that are so immediate that which I think is so I would say not just transdisciplinary, but also certain kind of transgeographical, ways in which that you're able to read and move across contexts and offer new ways to look at places you have known for a long time. Because we also get stuck in our expertise and our cities, and we tend to have shorthands to read them and not be able to tell. And the last thing is, I've not been on a project where we have anthropologists and climate scientists and documentary filmmakers and urban planners and housing experts all in the same team. It's lovely. It requires a lot of internal cross master classes. So we meet once a month in the network, teaching each other how to do each other's things, which is really joyful. But it's also amazing because the data that comes back is read by a set of very different eyes that are then see very different things. So I think transdisciplinarity, I will say, is an incredibly important part of this design of the research call, beyond just it being a requirement. But I will also say as an advice that it cannot just be a value. It has to be in the design of your project, and which means it needs time, resources, and labor, because otherwise it becomes something that's notional but doesn't really change the evidence. So, and I will say from our experience, we factored in labor and it took twice that labor. So I would say if you're really going to be transdisciplinary, put in the learning time so that really understand what each other is saying. But it's been joyful, really.
Thank you so much, Garth. And Garth, I'm just going to come to you just for a final and very quick comment, because we do want to open the floor up for questions. An important part of the scheme is the focus on engaged research. And can you just say a couple of words about the role of effective communication in ensuring meaningful engagement with key stakeholders, including communities most impacted by climate change?
Yeah, look, really quickly, and to build on what others have kind of said, I'm just gonna, kind of my key messages is audience. Just really think about the audience, and what you're trying to communicate, and make sure that you bring in the audience that you're working with, as the 2 other panelists have said. Great science, great data, great research, great technology is not enough, in terms of actually kind of influencing kind of policy and action and outcomes, and all the best work I've been involved in throughout my career, kind of going right back, kind of where, you teenage pregnancy, you need to, bring in teenagers, kind of smoking, you need to kind of, talk to kind of smokers, kind of, and really understand their audience. And in climate, I've done lots of work with, kind of with farmers, with fishing communities, with surfers, with swimmers, with, kind of executives, kind of business leaders. I mean, it's just absolutely critical. Success is not, won't happen without really being engaged and really understanding your audience and the work that you need to do, as the other two have made very clear.
Thank you so much, all of you. I'd just like to really appreciate our panel, Wilmot, Garth, Gautam, for your comments, for kind of making the call feel alive and hopefully help our audience understand what we're looking to achieve. Please stay on standby. I'm going back to Georgia now, who will be able to bring in questions from our audience. And over to you, Georgia.
Thank you so much, Madeline, and thanks to the panelists for a really insightful panel discussion. So we've had loads of questions. So as I said before, we won't be able to get to all of them, but we will be answering them all. If not right now, we'll be answering them offline. In addition to this, if you have further questions, if these questions are about anything to do with the application process, like eligibility, or questions about funding, please email fundingsupport@wellcome.org. We're going to put this all in the chat. But if you have more questions on kind of themes, you can email climateimpacts@wellcome.org. I'll just note that we cannot discuss competitiveness or specific scope questions. We cannot do scope checks through that email. So I'm now going to go through questions. I'm going to go for the ones that have been liked by many of you. And if there is a question for someone else, I'll pass it along. So first question, is there a preference for multi-country or single country proposals? There is not a preference. I'll also just note that a lot of these questions, the answers are in the scheme page. So I will just reiterate again, to review the scheme page, all of the sections. I promise you'll find the answers to your questions there. And if not, again, do email us. Is there a particular hazard or impact you are prioritizing this year? No, this is a kind of broad call, although I will say on the scheme page, we do have a section where we say this is not a requirement, but there are particular topics that we're interested in receiving proposals for, so you can see that on the scheme page. Co-applicants must work 20% FTE, collaborators cannot be funded, but the grant requires people and organizations in addition to co-applicants. Can we pay them as staff or consultants? Yes, you can have staff and consultants as part of the team. How many grants do you expect to award this year? How many applications do you receive annually? We don't have a set amount of projects that we fund. It's really to do with the quality of proposals that we receive. How many applications do you receive annually? Last year, we received over 200 proposals. Can NGOs be a co-applicant, or are research institutions mostly envisioned as co-applicants? NGOs can absolutely be co-applicants. It's not just designed for academic institutions. You just have to make sure that you can comply with Wellcome's grant conditions, which again, that is available on the scheme page. Would researching the immediate yet indirect impact of adverse climate events, for example, flooding on infectious diseases, specifically due to health service disruption during disasters, be eligible? So the impact of flooding on infectious disease would be in scope. You just have to, we're not looking, the focus can't be on the healthcare system. The focus has to be on the impact on human health. Please share examples of acceptable theories of change. There are different approaches. What we're looking for, we're not prescriptive in the type of theory of change. Many have included diagrams. That helps, but it's just that you're clear. What is the goal? What is the activities? that you will use to achieve that goal, and what are the outcomes of that. So just be clear, it's more about how you're setting your vision. So there aren't set theories of change that we're looking for. Why is it necessary to have a climate scientist on the team? Or can we just buy the knowledge when and where we need it so that funds can be used most effectively? I wonder, Madeline, if you want to come in on this question.
Okay, yes. So one of the challenges that we have discovered at Wellcome when bringing climate and health research to the fore is that the climate and health community are actually very far apart. And we find that there's quite a struggle for the health community to understand the likely impacts of climate in context for their particular problem. They might go off and say to the internet and download data that they think is appropriate, but not really be aware of the biases in that data, the limitations of that data, etc. And also climate scientists who participate in projects may not really understand the health consequences or how to engage with the health community. So it's we have a strong interest in bringing those communities together through these calls. If you see that there isn't if you like, a full-time job for climate expertise, but you have a strong collaborator with a very defined role, what we want to make sure is that the health community and the broader team have access to the right climate expertise for the particular climate related problem, and that they don't ignore that and just use information or data that's out there without appropriate support.
Thanks, Madeline. Okay, moving on. How many applications did you have on the last round? So as I said, we had over 200 proposals and we funded 11 projects. How many projects are you looking to fund? Again, we don't have a set number of projects we're looking to fund. Is 2.5 million the total amount available, or the maximum each project can request? It's the maximum each project can request, not the total available. The Wellcome Trust is a UK-based organization. Is it recommended or required to have a British organization? It is not recommended or required. This is a global call. How do you define mid-career researchers? So we provide information on the scheme page that lays out exactly what Wellcome means when they say early, mid, or established. So I would suggest looking through that resource. Can the project have a strong focus on adaptation to reduce the impacts of climate change on human health? That can absolutely be a part of the policy opportunity. In terms of scope, can the health impacts of climate change include the impact of climate change on healthcare provision as well as the impact on individuals' health? So the impact on healthcare provision or a health system, it cannot be the sole focus. It has to be the impact on individuals' health is the priority focus. By policy opportunity, do you mean that within the 3 years, one would demonstrate the change in policy, or that one would influence policy and that influence will manifest itself in a longer time frame? Madeline, maybe I could pass this one to you. Oh, you're just on mute.
And maybe Wilmot can also step in, is that policy change is not just one activity. There's a whole series of steps that might move towards significant policy change. So we would definitely want to see some of those steps towards change, yeah, that has a clear policy goal, and not all of that happen after the project. Wilmot, are you still with us?
Yes, no, I am. So great question. So what's required is to frame a policy pathway, depending on what the research question is and what the implementation interventions associated with that. So it requires a pathway, and that pathway has to lead in many cases through government, through the public sector. But to get there will require, as you've heard, community engagement. To get there will require speaking often to the private sector and companies, and then to implement that policy and for it to be received in a way that maximizes its impact will also require that kind of sort of smart collaboration in the partners as you go along. So that sounds all very abstract, but to say there has to be a real key understanding of what that policy pathway is and who the actors are and who the stakeholders are and who the champions are. So because it's obviously pointless formulating a policy and there's no budget behind it and it doesn't land. It will have no impact.
Thank you, Wilmot, and thank you, Madeline. Continuing down, would a proposal focus solely on the US be eligible? Yes, absolutely. Can you please clarify the difference between co-applicants and collaborators? We do outline this on the scheme page. Co-applicants have to they have to have a certain percentage of FT. There's sort of lists on that, so you can look on the scheme page. Is there a limit of each that can be a part of the bid? So it's a maximum 7 co-applicants plus the lead applicant, and collaborators you can have as many. You just have to justify them being in the team. Are NGOs considered collaborators? They can be collaborators or co-applicants. Individuals from organizations can be either. They just have to co-applicants can have to be able to comply with Wellcome's grant conditions. Does air pollution fall into scope? This is also outlined in the scheme page. So a fossil fuel related air pollution, if that was your entire project, it would not be in scope. But for instance, pollution as a result of wildfires and those health impacts, that would be in scope. Are co-applicants individuals or can they be organizations? So co-applicants are individuals from an organization or an individual. But an organization, you have to have one person named from the organization to be a co-applicant. In the proposal, Wellcome Trust mentions that you need to focus on physical health, mental health, and economic impact as key. Are all these needed? So no, it can be a physical health, physical health or mental health. It doesn't. It can be either of those. It doesn't have to be all of them. Are there required disciplines to be represented in an interdisciplinary team? No, it's up to you to demonstrate why the specific expertise is needed on the team, but we are looking for strong climate as well as health expertise on the team. Can the lead applicant be an NGO, an individual from an NGO? Yes. Can a team full of junior researchers, 3 to 5 years experience, be eligible for the call? So again, I would refer to the resource we've provided that shows what we mean by early, mid, and established researchers. And again, just for lead applicants, we're looking for mid-career or established career researchers, but the team can involve early career researchers. Can an organization involved as a subtractor for communication engagement and dissemination activities put forward a co-applicant, even if their primary role is not research, but rather the coordination of engagement, dissemination efforts? Absolutely. This is to ask if wildfire emissions on impacts on health are in scope. Yes, they're in scope. Also to inquire if community organizations can be lead applications. Yes, they can. About implementing partners, would you prioritize applicants with national, local government or research organization or community organization or project part? I'm not sure I understand that question, but we are looking for transdisciplinary teams that have community organizations, policy experts as part of the team. Can you repeat the criteria around multi-country work? Yes, so you can have projects that are focused on multi-country sites, but we would like to see if you are focused in different study locations that you do have a team member based in each of those And do email us if there is an issue with you being able to have that. And that's climateimpacts@wellcome.org. Sorry, I know we're running out of time, so I'll try and do a few more. But again, we will be answering these, continuing to answer these today. So I do apologize if we haven't been able to get to your question, but we are very responsive on our email as well. For the location of activity section, what level of demographic and institutional detail is required in the application form? So it should say, but I think Ben, if you want to come in on this question.
Sorry, Georgia, can you just repeat that for me? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah,
what
for the
question is.
location of activity section, what level of demographic and institutional detail is required?
Yep. So when completing the locations of activity, you'll need to put in the name of the organization, the country in which they're based, and then the percentage of the funds which will be allocated that you're proposing to that organization.
Great, thanks, Ben. Okay, just to end, Wellcome Trust is a UK. Oh no, I think I asked that one. You don't need to have a British member of the team. What do you mean by current or future health effects attributable to the consequences of climate change action? Yeah, I think I said this before, but so we're not looking this an example of that. It wouldn't be the health co-benefits of a specific adaptation or mitigation policy. That would not be in scope for this call. When would the next call be? So this is this is a scheme, so we run an annual call. So we will plan to have one next year, but I'll just note that the scope and remit, we can change that every year, and we try to based on insights from the climate and health space each year. So what you're seeing as in scope this year might not be the same as next year. And we'll update you on that. So I think that's a good place to end. Again, we will be going through these questions, and we've put in the chat our email address if you have questions about eligibility or remit questions. Thank you so much to all of you for joining and staying engaged with us, and for thinking about applying to this scheme. Thank you to Madeline and the panelists for a great discussion that really brought alive the key elements of this call. Thank you to Ben, Ella, and our digital team for helping behind the scenes. Great. So thank you, everyone, and we'll sign off now.